In this video, we're going to be talking about the best ways to search PubMed to ensure that your search is actually pulling back relevant papers. And we're also going to talk about how you should not be searching. So using these tips, you're going to avoid a very common problem that people have where their search either brings back nothing or just like hundreds of thousands of results. So it's really important to understand the actual mechanics of how PubMed works. And what this is going to do is it's going to help you to understand where things can go wrong without you even knowing it. So to illustrate this, I'm going to feed PubMed the type of question you might enter into Google or some other search engine. And in this case, we'll do, how do I manage a patient with trauma? So let's see what happened. You'll notice that we got back only 5 results. So here's what you're not going to do. Don't assume that means there isn't a lot published on your topic, especially because if we really think about it, it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, this isn't some niche topic with nothing written on it. Like, this is actually a pretty broad topic. So instead, something has actually gone wrong here. We just can't immediately see what it is. We also notice that we have this thing that's called articles by citation matching. I'll explain in a second what that means. What I'm going to show you is how to basically pop the hood of PubMed. So I like to think of it as popping the hood of a car to see what's going wrong with the engine, maybe like pulling back a curtain. You can think of it as a surgery where you're like opening up a body to see what's happening. And basically we are going to figure out and pinpoint what it is that got us these 5 results and only 5 results. So to pop the hood, you are going to first click the Advance button. And the steps I'm about to outline, I highly recommend that you use these after every search that you perform because you want to make sure that it's actually processing the way that it's supposed to be. So go ahead and click Advanced. Now, the thing that we're looking for here, it's pretty hidden. So we have to keep scrolling, and then we have to click this little caret icon here. And notice how when I click that, all of this stuff shows up. So it expands to reveal all of these details. But before we get into that, let's just take a look first at what's happening here. So we see here that, we see that there are red exclamation marks, so that's not great. But we also see that there are 2 searches instead of 1. So this search is the one that we gave to PubMed, and it actually brought back nothing. So what PubMed did, basically PubMed felt bad that it couldn't give us anything. So it came up with a second search, and that's what the articles found by citation matching means. Let's take a look here, though, at the search that we gave PubMed and see why it brought back nothing. So we're going to skip all of this stuff. This, for lack of a better term, is like the computer language that PubMed understands. It takes a while to learn. It's what people use when they do like systematic reviews and things like that. But we're going to skip all of that because we don't have time to learn all of that and move into this section called translations. So the words in bold are what PubMed pulled out of your question and identified as the most important parts of your question. If we keep looking and keep scrolling, we see here a section called warnings. So how, do, I, and with, they're all warnings. They're all identified as stop words. Stop words are words that the database either there's another meaning for them, like they could be produced as commands. So things like and, or, not, those are actually commands within a database, or they're things that are going to be ignored, or they're things that are going to be misinterpreted. So let's go back here. We see here that PubMed identified 3 different, you could think of them as major concepts, or just kind of like 3 different really important things within our question. And that's trauma, patients, and manage A. And this is really important here. It didn't identify it as manage. It actually sees it as manage A. So now the question becomes, why did PubMed interpret manage as manage A? And what does this mean for the overall search? So what it did is it interpreted manage A as a person. In other words, it's looking for someone on the paper who's an author with a last name of manage and a first initial of A. So to answer why it did this, we have to get into how PubMed works and the mechanics behind it. So PubMed uses something called automatic term mapping, and I'm going to leave a link below that gets into a lot of detail about it, but I'll give you the quick version. Automatic term mapping is when PubMed is trying to make guesses as to what it is that you would like. So PubMed understands this language up here. It's technically a markup language. You can think of it as like its native tongue. This syntax, assuming you haven't made any errors, if you put something like this into PubMed, and this is the type of searching that people do for like systematic reviews, it will retrieve exactly what it is that you would like. But because we did not do that, we did not put in all of this stuff. We put in like a basic plain English question. It is now having to interpret and make guesses at what we're after because it doesn't really know. You can think of it this way. If you were to approach somebody who is fluent in French and doesn't speak any Creole, and you were to start speaking to them in Creole, they might be able to pull out some of what you're saying and kind of interpret it correctly, but some of it they would have to make guesses at. They'd have to try to figure out, okay, what word does that kind of sound like? And it's sort of similar with PubMed. PubMed is recognizing certain things within here, but not understanding other things. You can see down here the warnings. These are things that it doesn't understand at all. And then this, of course, has been completely mangled and misinterpreted. And the reason for this specific error with the author is because if you were to look up somebody, so let's say you wanted to find all the papers written by a specific person, assuming their name isn't super common, you would put in their last initial or their last name and their first initial. So that's me. You'd hit search and it's going to pull back all the papers they've been on. So these are all the papers I've been on. So we want to avoid this from happening. And let's also take a peek at this second search here. So this was the alternate search that PubMed came up with because it couldn't find anything from this specific search. What it's done is it has found papers that have the word managed, the word patient, and the word trauma in the title. They don't have to be next to each other, but they have to be somewhere in the title, and they have to have all three of these words. That is an extremely limiting search. So what's happening is that is why we are getting back the 5. And it's just not representative of what this topic really pulls back because it is so limiting. And one thing that's kind of interesting about what's happened up here and how the search got mangled is there are things happening here with this automatic term mapping that actually are not that bad. So for example, trauma has some pretty good mapping going on here. I mean, it is interpreting it as physical trauma, not psychological trauma. So that would be an issue if you're, not interested in physical trauma. But it's mapping it to things like mesh terms. So that's a tagging system within PubMed. You may have heard of it. Finding synonyms, finding alternate endings to words, like these are all good things. But the issue is that this just completely changes everything. This completely messes up the search. So now the question becomes, how do we fix this? How do we keep PubMed from having to come up with an alternate search, at all? And can we just give it a search where there aren't any red exclamation marks, there aren't any warnings or errors, and it's not making these types of mistakes? And the answer is yes, we can do that. I'm going to show you. The way that we're going to fix this is we are going to delete everything that is messing up our search. So this is going to include everything that's highlighted in red down here. It's also going to include this word A, because as we have seen, this is causing quite a few problems. And we are also going to delete the question mark because you want to delete any sort of special characters. There are a lot of special characters within databases that have some sort of alternate meaning. They serve as some sort of command. So we want to get all of that stuff out of there. If you want to implement this for future searches, the question becomes, what do these words that we're deleting have in common? So you know what to delete beyond just special characters. So these words are essentially filler words. They're there to structure the question, but they're not really hitting at the heart of what it is that we care about. So when you try to do this in the future, keep that in mind. Remember that you're not putting together a fully formed question. You're just putting together your topic, and that's going to be your search. And you don't need any of this stuff because all it's doing is causing issues. You can actually kind of think of it as like a Roomba, right? So, like, you have your robot vacuum, it saves you time, it saves you energy, it's great. But the problem is, if you take it into a room that's just cluttered and full of junk, and there's all this stuff on the floor, it's not going to be able to do its job. It's going to be bumping into things. It's not going to work. And it's the same idea with PubMed. This stuff here that it's doing, like, this is all good stuff, and we want it to do this stuff. But the problem is it's bumping into these words, these special characters, it's getting really confused. So we remove the junk, we get that stuff out of there, and PubMed can work its magic. And in many cases, doing what I've just mentioned is going to be your stopping point. Now, I have specifically chosen a question that it's not going to work for this question. We have to take one more step after this. But for many, many cases, if you just put in something like this and let PubMed do its work, you've got nothing that's getting in the way. That's going to be where you end. You click search, you review the results, and you're fine. But in this case, we click search and you'll notice we now have the opposite problem. So before we were getting back 5 results, now we're getting back 180. If you can believe it, this is actually a good thing. And this is why. Before, we were under the false assumption that there was not a lot written on our topic. And that's just not true. Now we know for sure, because we have nothing in the search that's messing it up, we now know that this is a really, really broad topic and that we are going to need to focus in. So you may have the opposite problem where you remove all the filler words, you remove the special characters, and you find you're still getting back, a really small number of results. You now know that your question is really narrow. So now we've moved into step 2. What happens when you remove these words and you're still getting back too much or too little? So, as we see here, we are now facing the opposite problem. Whereas before we were getting back 4 results, we're now getting back over 180,000. We're getting back way too much. And as we quickly scan through some of the top articles here, we can get a sense of why that is. We're seeing pelvic trauma, blunt trauma, trauma in pregnancy, trauma teams. As we see, there's a lot of different types of trauma. And the issue now becomes the breadth of our topic. Our topic is just too broad, and we need to get more specific. So, the way that we're going to do that is we're going to add to it, we're going to add more details, add more words, and just get more specific. Now, if you encounter still too few results, you are not going to do this. You're not going to get more specific. You are going to do the opposite. You're going to get broader with your question. You're going to think about what can I delete? What am I willing to give up? That sort of thing. So think of it this way. If, let's say, back in college, you met with your professor and you said, I want to do a paper on women in the 21st century, they would tell you, you're going to have to narrow that down in some way. Which women exactly, when in the 21st century, are there other details that we can pull into this question? But on the other hand, if you went to them and said, I want to look at the effects of, say, caffeine supplementation on college students, test results of college students. But these college students can only be at Bryn Mawr, it can only be a group of sophomores, and it can only be during finals. They would tell you, you have to lose something from that. There's no way you're going to find everything that you want on your wish list, so to speak. You can even think of it like a housing search, let's say an apartment search. If you were to try to look at, every apartment for sale or for rent in the state of Connecticut that's under, $4,000 a month, that's way, way, way too broad. You have to bring in more details, more things that you care about. On the other hand, if you wanted an apartment that's, say, in right next to the Forest Hills stop in JP, and has an in-unit washer dryer and has a garage and it's under 3K a month, you would have to lose something. There's no way you're going to get everything on your wish list. So it's the same idea here. We have a question that is too broad, so we have to think about what do we care about, what other details we can add. And if we had the opposite problem where we were getting back too few results, then we'd have to think about what are we willing to give up and what are we willing to lose. For most people, it's easiest to start with patients, the patient group that you care about. People like to think about other people. They like to think about the people that they're wanting to help. So in this case, we could do something like add on a proposed intervention, get more specific about that patient group by saying that we want to be looking at geriatric patients, and we're now down to 20 results. Even if you were to just add in one of these things, this is still too high, but it's cutting it down significantly. And that's really good. So if you'll notice here, some of the things that I'm putting in, they're similar to the PICO question. So PICO is a way of structuring a question where you look at patient population, an intervention, a comparator if that's applicable, some outcomes. That's a great jumping off point. If you're struggling to think about what you want to add to an overly broad question, you can think about potential outcomes, all that sort of thing. And that's basically it. You get rid of all the stuff that is mucking up your question, essentially. And then in many cases, you're done and you don't have to keep searching. But if you find that you're still getting back nothing or close to nothing, then you want to think about what you can lose from your question, how you can broaden it, and if you're getting back way too much and faced with the opposite problem, then you want to be thinking about what other details, brainstorm what other details of your question can you pull in, what other ways you can get more specific, and that's how you search PubMed effectively.